Within every human being, there exists a silent battle, a constant war between the mind that seeks peace and the emotions that create turmoil. For millennia, Buddhist teachings have illuminated the path for those seeking liberation from this internal conflict. This is a story about a profound truth. Emotional detachment is not the absence of feelings, but the key to everything we seek in life. Deep within an ancient temple, where time seemed to flow differently, lived a young monk whose heart overflowed with restlessness. His days were filled with an anguish that not even the most rigorous practices could soothe. Every emotion struck him like a violent storm, leaving him lost in an ocean of turbulent thoughts. During his morning meditations, he would watch the other monks with envy, wondering how they managed to maintain such serenity while he drowned in his own emotions. Sadness visited him like an unwelcome old friend. Anger erupted in his chest without warning, and fear paralyzed him in the face of even the simplest challenges. His nights were plagued by restless dreams, and his days were a constant struggle to maintain the appearance of tranquility expected of a monk. On one particularly difficult morning, before the sun had touched the distant mountains, the young monk found himself in the temple garden, sweeping fallen leaves with slow, heavy movements. His hands performed the task, but his mind was lost in a whirlwind of thoughts about his failure to attain the inner peace he so desperately sought. It was then that his eyes caught sight of something that would change his life forever. Beneath an ancient Bodhi tree, its branches swaying gently in the morning breeze, sat an old monk. It was not the first time the young monk had seen him, but in that moment, something felt different. The elder radiated a presence that seemed to bend the very space around him, as if he existed in perfect harmony with everything surrounding him. The young monk stopped his work, mesmerized by the scene. The old man remained motionless, yet there was no rigidity in his posture. His wrinkled face carried a smile so subtle it could have gone unnoticed by less attentive eyes. Leaves drifted down around him, some settling on his shoulders, but he remained unchanged, like a mountain beneath a gentle snowfall. In that instant, something stirred in the young monk's heart. It was as if all his questions, all his internal struggles, converged into this single moment. With hesitant steps, he approached the elder, leaving his broom propped against a nearby tree. The sound of his feet on the dry leaves seemed strangely loud in his ears. As he neared the old monk, his emotions surged once more. Anxiety tightened his chest, fear whispered in his ears, doubt made his hands tremble slightly. But there was also something else, a courage born from desperation, a deep longing for answers that pushed him forward. He prostrated himself before the elder, his forehead touching the leaf-covered ground. The scent of damp earth and incense filled his lungs, while his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The words he had long held back finally found their way out, his voice trembling slightly with contained emotion. "Venerable Master," he said, keeping his head bowed, "I am lost in a sea of emotions I cannot control. Each feeling drags me like a powerful wave, pulling me further and further from the peace I seek. They say we must become empty of emotions to find true liberation, but the more I try to suppress what I feel, the stronger they return. How can I find the path to true freedom?" The silence that followed his words seemed to vibrate with a presence of its own. The young monk remained prostrated, his body trembling slightly with the intensity of the moment. The rustling of the wind through the Bodhi tree's leaves was the only response he received, until the old monk slowly opened his eyes, as if awakening from a deep dream. When his gaze met the young man prostrated before him, it carried the brilliance of 1,000 moons reflected in still waters. With a gentle gesture, he motioned for the young monk to sit before him. "You seek to rid yourself of emotions as one tries to cast away their own shadow," the elder said, his voice low and melodious, like a distant stream. "Tell me, young one, what do you see when you look at the sky above us?" The young monk, still trembling from the intensity of his emotions, lifted his eyes to the morning sky. Clouds of various shapes and sizes drifted lazily across the vast blue expanse. "I see clouds, master," he answered, puzzled by the apparent simplicity of the question. The elder smiled, the wrinkles on his face deepening like furrows in fertile soil. "And does the sky cease to be the sky because of the clouds passing through it? Does it struggle against them? Does it try to push them away or cling to them when they leave?" Something stirred within the young monk, a small spark of understanding. But before he could respond, the old monk stood up with surprising agility for his age and motioned for him to follow. They walked in silence to the temple's kitchen, where the elder took 2 ceramic cups and a steaming pot of tea. With precise and deliberate movements, he began pouring tea into the first cup. The amber liquid filled the vessel to the brim, yet the old monk did not stop. He continued pouring, allowing the tea to overflow, spilling over the sides and spreading across the table. Alarmed, the young monk stepped forward. "Master, the cup is overflowing." The elder continued pouring for a few moments longer before stopping and meeting the young monk's eyes. "Like this cup, your mind is so full of your own ideas about how things should be, so overflowing with judgments about your emotions that there is no space for true wisdom to enter." Placing the teapot down, the old monk took a cloth and began wiping the spilled tea with the same serenity with which he had poured it. "You do not need to be empty of emotions, young one. You need to create space within yourself so they can flow naturally, just as the tea flows into this cup." He then poured tea into the second cup, this time stopping at the right moment, and continued, "Your emotions are like this tea. They have their place, their purpose, their flavor. The problem is not in the emotions themselves, but in the way you overflow with them, how you try to control them, how you drown in every feeling that arises." The young monk watched the steam rising from the cups, swirling in the air before vanishing. For the first time in a long while, his heart began to feel a different kind of calm, not forced, but natural, like the very steam he observed. "But master," he said, his voice steadier now, "how can I create this space within me? How can I let emotions flow without drowning in them?" The elder picked up both cups of tea and handed one to the young monk. "Observe this tea. It does not struggle against the cup that holds it, nor does it try to be more or less than what it is. It simply is. Your emotions are like the tea, and your awareness is like the cup. You do not need to empty the cup, only to understand its true nature and purpose." The steam continued to rise from the cups, and the silence between them became a teaching in itself. The young monk felt every emotion arising within him: anxiety, confusion, hope. But now, for the first time, he began to perceive them differently, not as invaders to be expelled, but as passing guests in a home far larger than he had ever imagined. The silence of the kitchen was broken by the distant sound of thunder. The old monk lifted his gaze beyond the temple walls, as if he could see through them, and a subtle smile appeared on his lips. "Come," he said, rising to his feet. "Nature is offering us its own lesson." Leaving the teacups behind, master and disciple walked to the temple's Zen garden. It was a sacred space, meticulously arranged with stones, white sand, and a few carefully pruned shrubs. Above them, the sky darkened rapidly with storm clouds, and the wind began to blow more fiercely. "This garden," the elder said, "was arranged hundreds of years ago by the first monks who lived here. Every stone was placed with purpose. Every grain of sand has its place. It is a reflection of the order we seek in our minds." Pausing, he turned to the young monk. "Today, you will tend to it." The first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and cold. The young monk looked at his master in confusion. "During the storm, master?" "Especially during the storm," the elder replied, handing him a bamboo rake. "You must keep the patterns in the sand perfect. no matter how much the rain tries to erase them. Continue until I return." With these words, the old monk withdrew, leaving the young disciple alone in the garden as the storm intensified. The rain now fell in torrents, and the wind howled through the trees. The young monk began his task, carefully raking patterns into the sand, only to watch them be instantly washed away by the water. Frustration grew in his chest with each failed attempt. His fingers went numb from the cold. His soaked robes clung heavily to his shoulders. Still, he continued, tracing line after line in the sand that refused to hold any shape. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of relenting, and the young monk felt every possible emotion course through him. Anger at the apparent futility of the task, sadness at the impossibility of success, fear that he was failing some important test, despair at his inability to keep the patterns perfect as instructed. Then, at the height of the storm, when his arms ached and his mind screamed for him to give up, something began to shift within him. As if a veil had been lifted from his eyes, he started to observe his emotions the same way he observed the storm, as a natural passing phenomenon. The frustration was still there, but he was no longer the frustration. The exhaustion remained, but he was not the exhaustion. The sadness came and went, like waves of rain, but he was not the sadness. For the first time, he truly began to understand what the master had said about the sky and the clouds. His hands continued moving the rake, but now there was a different quality to his movements. He no longer fought against the rain that erased his patterns. Instead, each motion became a dance with the storm. Every line he drew was an expression of the present moment, free from attachment to what would come next. The Zen garden had become a mirror of his own mind. Emotions, like the storm, would come with all their force. Some would be gentle as drizzle, others as fierce as thunder. But he did not have to be swept away by them. He could continue his work, moment by moment, allowing each emotion to pass like clouds in the sky. When the old monk finally returned, he found the young disciple still working, completely drenched, yet with a serenity on his face that had not been there before. The elder watched in silence for a few moments before speaking. "What have you learned?" The young monk stopped his work and looked at his master, the rain still falling upon them both. "I have learned that I cannot control the storm, just as I cannot control my emotions. But I can continue my path through them without being lost in their power." The old monk contemplated the young man's response with a serene smile and gestured for him to follow. The rain had softened into a gentle drizzle, and the air was filled with the scent of wet earth. They walked in silence through the temple corridors until they reached a small natural pond, hidden among ancient rocks and surrounded by bamboo that swayed gently in the breeze. The surface of the pond was dotted with the last raindrops, creating concentric circles that expanded and vanished in an endless motion. The elder sat by the water's edge and invited the young monk to do the same. "Look at your reflection in the water," the master instructed. The young man leaned over the pond, watching his own image, distorted by the ripples of the falling rain. His face appeared and disappeared with the rhythm of the undulations, sometimes clear, sometimes unrecognizable. "What do you see?" asked the elder. "I see my reflection, master, but it's always changing, never staying the same for more than an instant." The old monk picked up a small stone and tossed it into the center of the pond. The young man's reflection shattered into 1,000 fragments, scattered by the spreading waves. "And now, what do you see?" "I can no longer see my reflection clearly, master. The waves have completely distorted it." The elder nodded slowly. "Your emotions are like these waves on the water. When you allow them to stir your mind, your true self, your fundamental nature, becomes obscured, difficult to recognize. But watch closely." Gradually, the ripples began to settle. The surface of the pond grew smoother and smoother until the young monk's reflection reappeared, clearer than before. See how the water always returns to its natural state of clarity, the master continued. It does not fight the waves, nor does it try to force stillness. Clarity emerges naturally when we allow disturbances to settle on their own. A bamboo leaf drifted gently onto the pond, floating on the now mirror-like surface. The reflection of the sky above was so perfect that it was difficult to tell where reality ended and the reflection began. Your true nature is like this pond in its natural state, clear, calm, capable of reflecting reality exactly as it is. Emotions will come like the rain, like the stones we throw, like the leaves that fall. They will create ripples, temporarily distort the reflection, but they cannot change the fundamental nature of the water. The young monk watched, mesmerized, as another raindrop fell into the pond. This time, however, instead of focusing on the distortions, he kept his attention on the water itself, on its unchanging nature beneath the passing ripples. "But master," he asked, "how can I maintain this clarity when emotions are so intense, when the waves seem endless?" The elder reached out and lightly touched the water's surface with his fingertips. "It is not a matter of maintaining, but of recognizing. Even in the midst of the greatest storm, the nature of the water does not change. It remains water capable of reflecting, capable of returning to clarity. Likewise, your true nature remains untouched by the emotional storms that pass through you." A bird flew low over the pond, its reflection gliding across the surface without leaving a trace. See how the bird's reflection appears and disappears, leaving no mark on the water. So too should your emotions, allowed to come and go, without leaving scars on your essential nature. The sun began to break through the clouds now, its rays dancing on the surface of the pond like golden jewels. The young monk felt a deeper understanding forming within him, as if the very light was illuminating corners of his mind that had once been in darkness. "So it is not about having no emotions," he said slowly, "but about recognizing that they are like reflections in the water, real in appearance, but incapable of changing the fundamental nature of what we are." The old monk rose from the edge of the lake, signaling that it was time to move on. As they walked, they reached a bamboo grove that stretched majestically toward the sky. The rain had stopped completely now. The droplets still clung to the green leaves, glistening like tiny diamonds under the emerging sunlight. "Observe the bamboo," the elder said, pausing in the middle of the grove. "They are strong enough to withstand storms, yet flexible enough to dance with the gentlest breeze." At that moment, a stronger gust of wind passed through the grove, making the bamboo bend gracefully. The sound of their stalks brushing against each other created a natural melody, as if the grove itself were whispering ancient secrets. "During the storm," the master continued, "you saw these very same bamboo. They bent almost to the ground, yet none of them broke. Do you know why?" The young monk watched as the bamboo slowly returned to its original position, effortlessly regaining its form. "Because they are flexible, master?" "Yes, but there is more to it than that. The bamboo understands its true nature. It does not resist the force of the wind, nor does it try to remain completely still. It does not fight the storm, nor does it surrender to it. It dances with it." Stepping closer to one of the bamboo stalks, the elder continued, "Many mistake emotional detachment for rigidity, for the attempt to become like a rock, unmoving, unfeeling. But the rock, in its stiffness, can be shattered by the storm. The bamboo, in its conscious flexibility, remains whole." The young monk touched one of the bamboo stalks, feeling its strength and suppleness at once. A drop of water slid from a leaf above, landing on his face. He did not move to wipe it away, allowing it to trace a path down his skin, just as he had learned to let his emotions flow. "When you were in the Zen garden," the master said, "your first instinct was to fight against the rain, to protect the patterns at all costs. You were being like the rock. But when you finally allowed yourself to move with the storm while staying true to your purpose, you began to be like the bamboo. A stronger gust of wind swept through the grove, making the bamboo dance more vigorously. The young monk watched in wonder as each stalk swayed uniquely, yet all remained deeply rooted in place. "Master," he said, a new understanding dawning within him. To be without emotions does not mean not feeling them, but rather to be like the bamboo, able to bend with them without breaking, to dance with them without losing one's grounding. The elder smiled, pleased. Emotions are like the wind, sometimes a gentle breeze, sometimes a raging storm. We cannot control the wind, just as we cannot control the arising of emotions. But we can choose how we relate to them. Walking through the bamboo grove, the master continued, "Notice how each bamboo is deeply rooted in the earth. No matter how much it bends, its roots keep it firmly anchored. In the same way, when you are rooted in your true nature, you can experience every emotion without being uprooted from your center." The young monk closed his eyes, feeling the wind on his face, listening to the music of the bamboo. For the first time, he truly began to understand that the path was not about eliminating emotions, but about finding that deep place of grounding within himself, that unshakable center from which he could fully experience each emotion without being lost in it. "True strength," the elder said, his voice blending with the whisper of the bamboo, "does not lie in resisting emotions or trying to control them, but in developing the ability to remain rooted while they move through you. Like the bamboo, you can be both strong and flexible, firm in your essence while dancing with the winds of life." The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, as the old monk led his disciple to a small lake covered in lotus flowers. The blossoms rose majestically above the water, some still closed, others fully open, their petals touched by the day's final rays. "This will be our last lesson," said the elder, sitting by the water's edge. "Observe the lotus flowers. What do you see?" The young monk gazed at them for a long moment before replying. "I see beautiful flowers, master, born from the mud yet remaining pure above the water." "Yes," the elder nodded. "And this is the true nature of emotional detachment that you have been seeking. Like the lotus, we are born into a world of turbulent emotions, the mud of our desires, fears, anger, and attachments. But we do not need to identify with that mud, nor attempt to escape it." A gentle breeze made the flowers sway, droplets rolling off their petals without leaving a trace. "Throughout this day," the master continued, "you have learned that your emotions are like overflowing tea, like the storm in the Zen garden, like the waves in the lake, like the wind among the bamboo. Now, look at these lotus flowers and understand the final lesson. You can rise above your emotions without denying them. You can bloom within them without being stained by them." The young monk watched as a drop of water slid down a lotus petal, retaining its perfect shape without being absorbed. "Like water on a lotus petal," he said softly, "emotions may touch our existence, but do not have to penetrate our essence." "Exactly," the elder smiled. "True emotional detachment is not the absence of emotions, but the ability to experience them fully while keeping our fundamental nature untouched. Like the lotus, we can be completely immersed in the world of emotions and still maintain our inner clarity and purity." The sun now kissed the horizon, and some flowers began to close for the night, while others remained open, each following its own natural rhythm. "See how each flower opens and closes in its own time," said the master. "Some emotions will come like the morning, others will leave like the evening. Some will be intense like midday, others gentle like twilight. Wisdom lies in allowing each to have its moment without trying to rush or hold on to them." Rising to his feet, the elder placed a hand on the young monk's shoulder. "When you truly understand this, you realize that you already have everything you need. The peace you seek is not found in eliminating emotions, but in remaining like the lotus emerging from them, dancing with them, yet keeping your fundamental nature intact. A deep serenity settled within the young monk's heart, not as an absence of emotions, but as a clear, luminous presence capable of holding them all. True liberation, the master concluded, his voice blending with the whisper of the wind among the flowers, is not in becoming empty of emotions, but in discovering that part of you that, like the lotus, can rise from the mud of suffering and bloom in all its beauty without denying its roots, yet remaining unstained by them. In this state of natural grace, you will find all that you seek, not because emotions have ceased, but because you have learned to bloom through them. And so, as the last light of the day painted the sky and the lotus flowers glowed with a golden radiance, the young monk finally understood. The path was never about becoming empty of emotions, but about discovering that part of himself that, like the sky beyond the clouds, like the water beneath the waves, like the bamboo in the storm, and like the lotus rising from the mud, remains eternally clear, strong, and beautiful, no matter what emotions come and go.